So I'm just going to go around and introduce everybody briefly. Let's see. So beginning in my upper left is the filmmaker of Fill My Heart with Song, which is David Walker. And David is coming to us from Boston, right?
Correct.
Okay. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Next is Polly Wells, who's the director of We Began to Sing. Polly and I have already talked. Polly and her subjects appeared with us earlier this week for a pre-recorded interview. And there's several of those on our website if anybody's interested in even more bonus content besides the live Q&As. There's a great conversation with Polly's subjects which you can find pretty easily through our website. You go through our website and click on the film page, and the bonus content is right there. We also have Michele Schitoni, who I just have had to practice that in my head a few times to get it right. Is that close enough?
Yes.
Michele.
Yes.
Schitoni, who's in Rome.
In Rome, from Italy, yes.
Yes, and Michele is the filmmaker of 5x7, the film about that photographer who goes back to Italy after a 50 or 60-year lapse to meet again with the community members that he photographed when he was a much younger man. And then last but not least, we have Edward and Patty Salier, who are the filmmakers of Progress, the film about Soho in New York City. And they're coming to us from LA, rather. So welcome, Edward and Patty.
Hello.
Hi.
That's
very happy to be here.
Yes. And we just talked about how you felt the earthquake. So you know what? Maybe we'll let you. We'll start with you. Actually, I think I'm going to go around and ask a question of each of you, and we'll go maybe from shortest to longest films. So yours is the shortest. So we'll start with yours. So I guess what I would like you to. Well, your film is pretty self-evident. You know what it's about and why you made it and where the idea came from, I think. But I'm wondering if you can kind of address to what extent it fits what we tried to accomplish with bringing all these films together in the Committed to Memory shorts block in terms of remembering. Obviously, your film is designed to remember the neighborhood and all the changes, all the vast changes that it's been through over the last 75 or 100 years. Do you want to just talk about that for a little bit, or talk about the idea behind making the film?
Well, okay. So there's a couple of questions in there, but basically I had this footage of those workers in the factory, and we were really interested in using the footage and seeing what we could do with it. And so the film was sort of structured around the idea of, well, what happened in the building, what happened in Soho, and it all kind of was based though on that idea of how could we expand what we had. And so I also had a large collection of photographs of Soho from the time period when I lived there.
Yeah. So
obviously we were able to incorporate that material. And then we just started researching the history of it. And it was a fascinating history. And so, it just kind of built on that. And then, finding a structure as to like how to pull all these pieces together in a sort of a compelling, emotional way.
And then we put it together. Got it together, sent it out to a whole bunch of film festivals, got rejected by every single film festival. Brought it back, said, hey, we got to redo this, make it more personal, and put more emotion in it. And that was the version that is in your festival.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, yeah. So actually that leads to my next question, which is the two guys who were working in the metal shop from what was it the 1970s or so?
Yeah.
Right? They were sort of the last, of a dying breed of industrial workers still working in the neighborhood, right? Saul and Jaime. I'm not sure that this is clear or not, or maybe I just missed it. Was that footage that you took yourself, or did you did shoot that right then?
Well, I didn't personally shoot it. I shot it as a director, basically. I directed the footage, and wanted to make a film about these guys. I was pretty young and I didn't really know much about what I was doing. So the film actually ended up being about how this process works. What's the process of metal spinning?
Hmm.
It ended up kind of being a little bit of a boring film. And I set it aside, and then like many years later, my cinematographer, we had lunch one day, and he said, well, what about that film, that footage? And so I still had the original 16 millimeter negative. I still had the original sound mix. And so I transferred it, had it telecine, and it looked great. I mean, when we color corrected it, actually we brought out more detail than it had when it was actually a 16 millimeter print. So that was sort of really encouraging. And that was really the basis of it once we saw what we had, but trying to fit what was an 11-minute film originally and was about these guys, how you spin metal, which is kind of esoteric and wasn't very interesting, into pulling out the bits that were still useful in terms of this other context. And like Patty was saying, originally we restructured it as a film about the building, and that wasn't too interesting. I mean, it was interesting to us, the history of the building, the development of Soho, but it just didn't have any
Film
resonance.
festivals hated it.
It didn't grab anybody. So Patty's emotional writing, how are we going to grab an audience and make it more interesting from just a personal point of view? And I said, well, I got all these pictures of me, let's weave that into it. So then it was just a question of how do you weave all these elements together and kind of come up with a compelling story.
Yeah, and how do you make these guys fit into the story and care about the guys?
Yeah.
In relation to New York's, history, Soho's history.
Yeah. Well, that came through. So good for you two for sticking with it and being willing to sort of, start from scratch again a second time. One last quick.
Gave up.
Well, he was giving up. I said, I never give up. We got to do it over.
That's why you're a team, right?
Right, exactly.
One last quick thing for Edward before we move to before we start moving around the room a little bit. So, you mentioned that you didn't really know what you feel like you didn't really know what you were doing when you shot those guys, 40 years ago or about 50 years ago almost, I think. But you've since gone on to a long history, a long career in film and TV, right? So do you want to just mention that for a minute?
Well, I was already working as an apprentice in the film industry at the time when I made the film. And I just fell into editing. It wasn't something that I had set out to do or anything. I just kind of fell into it, and I loved it, and it just developed into a career. And I was very fortunate and pretty successful, and did a bunch of low budget features, and came out to Hollywood and ended up in the television industry, and kept me busy. And
Best Hollywood TV editor.
I did all right.
Yeah, and he's still being, and yet he still is characterized as a first-time filmmaker because with this film, because
Right.
for all the decades
right.
of editing,
That's right.
never actually had his name as listed as director before.
Correct. And you'd think after 40 years of editing, I'd have some idea what I was doing. And no.
Well, speaking of knowing what you're doing, I'm just going to take a moment. It's just been pointed out to me that we had a little bit of a technical issue right before we went live. And so apparently all of us here were live about a few minutes before we actually did our countdown and said we were live. So hopefully none of us embarrassed ourselves. I don't think we did. I think we're okay. But the audience got probably a rip-roaring look behind the scenes at what it's like to set up a virtual film festival Q&A. But anyway, so thanks for bearing with us, folks. We're doing the best we can, and we're having fun with it. So, David, your film is next lengthwise, so we're going to talk to you next. And I think, so I mentioned the bonus content that we have, and among that collection is a chat that our director had with you and your subject, Joel, right? So for those who haven't seen the bonus content yet, do you want to just address how you and Joel first met and came together, and thinking that this would make a good subject for a short film?
Yeah, I'm a corporate photographer as my day job, and I was covering an event, and Joel was there helping with catering or just helping organize the event. And sometimes you have downtime at these things, and he was standing next to me. He said, do you do video at all? I do this sing-along program at a residence center that my mother is at. And I was interested in the topic of dementia and music because my grandmother had Alzheimer's for 13 years. And we used to, when she was at the assisted living facility, I would bring him a cello player and I would bring my cello in. And even after she'd lost a lot of the verbal ability and, was very, had very progressed in the illness, the music still really captivated her and it had like a really strong impact on her. So I was interested from that standpoint right off the bat. The project was just supposed to be filming one of the sing-alongs where he goes in and sings these songs, and that was all it was really going to be. And it was going to be sort of more of a promotional piece for him to sort of shop around at other places around the state and kind of demonstrate what he does. But once I met him and his mother and kind of saw the relationship that unfolded between them, I wanted to sort of capture that and weave that into the piece as well. And so that's sort of what led to what I think is really more the central aspect of it, which is a story about a mother and son.
Yeah. So did you have to convince Joel that this was more of like a film festival type of short feature that with a human component to it? I mean, not that there's not a human component to the story in the first place, but rather than a promotional video that he was going to use for his business.
Yeah, convincing, maybe not the right word, more just like kind of making him trust me that, he wasn't thinking in those terms. But as, I think that's often what we try to do. We as filmmakers, as documentarians, often see stories where other people may not, especially if it's a story about your own self. Sometimes you don't see your own life in those terms. So I think he trusted that I was onto something, but was also a little surprised maybe that I took this interest in, what to him is just everyone with the relationship with their mother. It's just something you do, or it doesn't seem that special maybe, but the fact that she had taught him so many of these songs has lost sort of the memory of them, and for him to sort of return those songs to her was kind of a touching story to me. So that's sort of what I pursued. But yeah, convincing, yes, he was a little skeptical, I guess, maybe at the beginning, but as it went on, became more confident that we had something.
Right. And, as far as the subject of remembering or committing to memory, I mean, obviously this is a case where he not only is he hoping to have his mother try to, sort of trigger some memories that she's lost because of her dementia. And also you as the filmmaker are committing to memory his relationship with his mother in her later years, right?
I think that's like the thing that I'm most proud of and happy about the project is that I have given him a document and his family a document that they can always have as a family, and it's sort of the interactions that maybe we would otherwise forget or tend to forget, but are still really meaningful, and just to have given him and her and their family this document of this time in their life was really fulfilling for me.
Right. So by a difference of 1 minute, Michele's, it's Michele. His film is 1 minute shorter than Polly's, so I'm going to talk to Michele next. We're going in order of length of film. But before I ask Michele a question, I'm going to just mention that we've heard from a couple of viewers, Natalia and Javon, who both wanted to just say that they really loved the shorts block. Really enjoyed watching them. Awesome block of films, lovely collection of films. Appreciated the different interpretations of memory. So maybe we were onto something in putting all your films together. I hope so, and it certainly seems like viewers appreciated them all. So thanks again, Michele. You talk to me a little bit about how you found Frank and this story. I would imagine that the story of him returning to the town where he shot those pictures 60 years ago was kind of, made the news a little bit around at least the area that it's Lacedonia, right? Is that what it was?
Lacedonia.
Okay. At least around there, if not around Italy. Is that true, or how did you come to approach him and say, let's make a film out of this?
Not at the beginning. The story is well known now, after a long process of dissemination. Okay.
Yes, good.
But at the beginning, it was really a unknown story. It is a form to participate in the process that I was joined. That was the establishment of this small museum, local museum, and in Lacedonia.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the idea to recount the story, because recounting the story, I think could be interesting for people, for the audience, for the public, and make easier than people could go to Lacedonia and see those photographs.
Yeah, right.
Actually, many of them didn't remember the presence of Frank Canchan 60 years before. Then the film contributed to the new linkage of the memories. Okay.
Yeah. There's the woman who says exactly that. Who says,
yes. Yes.
I didn't know it was me until I saw the shirt. Right. You know, the top that she was wearing or whatever, and then I realized, oh, gee, that is me 60 years ago, right?
Yes. You know, the story is that one of those photographs was found by chance on internet. That's the start of the film.
Right.
And from there, the story goes on.
So Frank talks about how he saved the photos.
Yeah.
But he didn't necessarily, and he's obviously spent his career in large part as a photographer, as a working photographer, but he didn't necessarily have plans to do anything to exhibit the photos from Lacedonia until that connection was made, when the one picture was found on the internet, right?
He exhibited the photos only in the 50s in the United States. Because at that time he wanted to have a career which could link his anthropological interest in people with the photographic passion, but he didn't realize to make that linkage. So he had a long university career as an economic anthropologist, and left the photographs behind in a box. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So now the story began again when he retired.
Right. We have a question from Jess about your film, which is, she wants to, and I'm curious about this too. She wants to know about how you put the soundtrack together. It's all original music, I think, right?
No, not really.
Existing music in Italy?
Yes, they are local authors. The jazz author is from Lacedonia, and particularly one of the tracks it was written thinking about the popular parties that were done in a hall there in Lacedonia.
Okay.
And the other one is electronic music. I thought that it was very interesting to try to find a linkage between the memory, the old stories, with an electronic music like that. It was an experiment.
And there's there's kind of some reggae sounding songs at the beginning, right? Is that the electronic musician, or?
Yes.
Okay. And is that so it's all Italian music, essentially, right? Italian.
Yes. They are from Naples.
Okay.
The jazz music is of an author from Lacedonia. The other one is from Naples.
Natalia wants to know, Michele, have the villagers seen the film?
Oh, yes, but partially. Yes, only a few. I think now with the internet dissemination, I think many of them, more of them have seen it. But it's not so easy. It's not so easy to organize projections, cultural events, because of. It's really a difficult area, really a difficult region.
Mm-hmm.
Making culture there is something that for minorities, for short and small minorities, that try to use culture to trigger a new development for that areas that are really abandoned, left behind, like all the inner south of Italy.
And I guess I should just say welcome any Lachudonians who might be here with us now, because you can be, because we're in the virtual era where, you know, you could be screening Michele's film from Italy. So that brings me to Polly. Hi, Polly. How are you?
Hi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks again for being here. So, do you want to maybe just talk a little bit about the idea of remembering in terms of your film? The idea that that folk tradition. What your film is about basically is about remembering it and trying to keep it alive, right?
It's certainly a part. I think sort of the subtext of the film is that singing is something we are all wired to do. We all know how, we all can sing, and we've been doing it in human societies. Every human society sang together informally. You know, from the time we were sitting around campfires and living in caves, we were probably singing in some form. And that really continued until the last 100 years, when communal singing, informal singing just sort of died out as a result of technology. We really lost something super important in losing that habit of singing. And I also think what's happened in the last 100 years, which is really sad, is that because voices are so technically perfected now, and to sing is to be a professional, a professional singer. And many people have gotten this message that they shouldn't sing and they can't sing, and that singing is for only good singers. And making this film, I really came to believe that we are all singers. I mean, it's part of our DNA to be singers, and we all have the right to sing, and we would all get a huge amount out of singing if we use that voice we have more, especially with other people. I think the communal nature of it brings us just incredible, I mean, there's documented sort of physical effects, psychological effects, socialization effects. It's just really a powerful thing to do with other people. And to the extent the film can stimulate people to do it more, that's one purpose of the film.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, because obviously one of the focal points of the film is Pete Seeger, obviously. And I think that that's one of the most amazing things that he did for American song, is that, in his younger years, he was a good singer, but not a spectacular singer. He wasn't technically amazing or anything. And then in his older years, were, he had like 40 of the years of being an older singer.
Yeah.
And, I saw him at one point about 20 years ago or so. His voice was shot, and he demonstrated exactly what you're just talking about, that, singing is for everyone, and group singing is for everyone, and it doesn't matter if you have a good voice or not. So let's talk for a minute about Annie and Peter and their commitment to activism through singing, and maybe also your thoughts on that in terms of what was going on when you started making this film a few years ago to the present day, when obviously it sort of seems like this film was made yesterday to be about, in terms of activism, in terms of raising your voice to protest if you feel like the need is there.
Yeah. well, I'll just go back a little bit to really what sparked me to make the film or think this would be a great story. I'd had a copy of Rise Up Singing since, it was made in the 80s. But it wasn't until 2008 or 9, possibly. There was an article in the New York Times about how this book, Rise Up Singing, was actually kind of holding some communities together. The article was set in East Lansing, Michigan, which had been devastated by the economic collapse. And there was a group of people coming together every month and using the book to sing. And it was kind of a lifeline for that community. And the larger context of the article was that the book has sold so many copies and is sort of everywhere. And it's enabled people to sing together in a way that they didn't without this sort of compilation of all these songs. Even though it's just lyrics, I mean, you could find a way to sing, and then the internet helps you learn the tune too. So that was the context in which I thought, wow, this is a great story. There's sort of like the little songbook that could, And then I didn't really get started filming until 2012 because, I'm an independent filmmaker. Everything takes forever. And then as we, made, and it took a number of years to make it. And through that time period, there was sort of Occupy happened, and Trump got elected, and there was,
the Women's March and all that.
Right. Lots of things have happened in that period. And there's a huge amount of value as the film goes into in singing as a form of activism. So, but there isn't as much now, partly because there isn't as much singing and activism, partly because not as many people sing for the reasons I've already stated. But I think there's an opportunity, shall we say, to use it as a tool and as a driver of human connection, and everybody getting on the same page very quickly by singing a song. So I think there's the small A activism of that East Lansing community, and then there's the big A activism of these large movements of people and singing together works at both levels. And I think that's a lot of what Annie and Peter do. They do both types of activism, I would say.
So that kind of leads to another audience question, actually, which is, do you think community singing is possible via Zoom this way? And I think that we talked about it in the bonus content when I spoke with you and Annie and Peter, but go ahead and answer that for Natalia, if you can.
Well, Zoom is not great for singing together, but there is an ongoing, for every Friday night, there's a song circle in Toronto that uses Zoom, and 30 people show up, and you can kind of sing to yourself and hear the person leading a song around the circle. It's hard for 30 people to be singing on Zoom, but that is going every week. So people are finding ways to do it. But I think it's also true that many of us are isolated because of COVID, but we're not necessarily alone. I live with 2 other people, or lots of people who share, houses with other people or apartments. So I think singing can happen even in a smaller context as well. And of course, people like Annie and Peter continue to share songs on the internet and encourage people at home to sing with them. It's not ideal, and it's a shame that singing is a particularly, it's not a great activity because of the transmission issue. But I have faith that we will soon be back together again, and I think the film is as much about the need to work together, be together, maybe not physically, but that's where things happen, is when we come together. And singing, when we finally get to be together in person, will be there.
So if I were to ask you which I think I'm going to ask you, what maybe you learned about yourself or your community or your country. But you set out to tell Annie and Peter's story, and I think the answer is kind of, I mean, you tell me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of that idea what you've said a few times to me now is that singing is this deeply held physiological thing that we've always had as human beings, and will always be a part of us, whether we're tending to it or not. Is that fairly safe to say?
Yeah, I think I learned that I've been looking for it my whole life in a way, because I always sort of felt like an outsider, or someone watching from the edge. And when I sing with other people, I feel like I belong. It's kind of an instantaneous experience of connection. So that was pretty powerful. And I learned it, over the course of the years, I guess. But I learned it immediately and then realized how powerful it really was and how it changed my life in some way, gave me a community. But I don't know, making a film, I think you learn every day. It's so hard. It's so confusing, especially documentaries. And we've already heard finding the story, how to express all these things you care so much about in a way that I learned also that I had to ask for help, that I couldn't make this film by myself. And I made it because I got a team together who helped me. And that I should have learned that a long time ago, but I really learned that this time.
So I think I'm going to go around the room and ask a similar question of each of the rest of you to kind of wrap things up, unless any last minute audience questions airmail themselves in. Let's see, Patty and Edward, can you tell me, so your film turned out to be much more personal than you originally kind of envisioned it. What would you say, what would either of you say, or both of you say, in terms of what you learned about yourself or your home city of New York, or just in general about people or buildings or places, the sense of place? What would you say you learned in the course of making your film?
Well, I think for me, it was more learning sort of about these cycles of history that take place, in general, but, of course, specifically for New York. But, you see the constant change, the constant development. And for me, that was just fascinating. As far as personally, I wouldn't say that it had as much impact in terms of that. I mean, kind of discovering some of the things that I had photographed, though, in the 70s kind of surprised me. So that was interesting to me personally. And it's not something I don't think necessarily I brought into the film, except for those shots where I was not in them and then I was in them.
You're in them, yeah.
And then that was a discovery, because I had no idea I had done that. And to this day, I've thought about it a lot. I go, like, what possessed me to do that, and when did I do it? I really have no idea. So
it was the 70s.
I was clueless. It was the 70s.
Right.
God knows what I was smoking at the time, but anyway, that was, I don't know.
Well, no, for me, it's very simple. The last piece of dialogue, you have to lose something to gain something.
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that's part of life.
Right. Yes. Okay. Beautiful and perfect. Yeah, exactly. So, David, do you want to talk briefly about what do you think you learned that maybe change? What did you learn in the process of making your film?
I mean, definitely want to echo what Pauly said about I planned as I go forward in making films to try to involve more people and creating a team, and I think, as a young filmmaker, sometimes you try to do it all yourself. And I think we do better when we bring other voices into our projects.
Yeah.
As far as like things outside of the realm of filmmaking, or I guess just what you can gain and what you can observe when you just watch a interaction unfold in front of you, and whether there's a camera there or not. I think when we arrive at situations with expectations, and there's often very fascinating things that are, if you just kind of sit back and let them happen, you can capture amazing and authentic moments. So I think that's the thing I learned, which applies both to filmmaking, but also life in general. I think like the more I just kind of tried to like create a situation where people were doing things in front of me and just make sure the camera was on them and was right there and on close to them as you can get, like, it's just things that are amazing, just moments that I think are really charming will happen, and just having faith in that process. But it's not always about directing or sort of like trying to dictate what's going to happen. Sometimes it's just being fluid and being patient can bring you a long way.
Right. Great. And then, Michele, I'm going to ask you the same thing or something similar. You know, what would you say you learned in the process of making this film?
Actually, I looked for a relationship with Frank Canchan, exactly to learn about something about the method.
Mm.
And I had I was confirmed that of the importance of respect, of considering every single story as a big value, and not being too much concentrating the result, but being concentrating in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
That's very important. At the same time, every film I make, I'm more and more convinced that I need a more professional, less solitary handmade activity for my filmography. So I must find a compromise, the right compromise. That's the deal.
And actually, what you said about learning from Frank, I mean, he had some great advice, not just for photographers, but I think, you know, advice that any filmmaker could also take.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I found him to have some really great wisdom about you know, making pictures or, you know, framing things, that sort of stuff. Okay, I think we are. I heard one of my dogs bark a minute ago, so I think it's time
We
to.
did too. We heard your dog too.
Yeah, so I think it's time to go for a walk before he starts barking more frequently. I'm just going to say a quick thank you to each of you again for being here, and to a couple of you for also being with us earlier this week to film some bonus content. Thanks to Edward and Patty. May there be no after tremors in LA anytime.
Thanks for having us on. Thanks for having us on.
We're happy to have you here. So thanks for being here.
All right. Thank you.
And David, thanks so much for David Walker. Thanks so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing what you do next.
Thanks for having me. It was great to be here virtually.
Michele, again, thanks again for checking in from Rome with us, and your English is much better than you think it is.
Thank you for having me and for your kind hospitality.
Well, you know, maybe someday in person when you make a next film and there's a vaccine. And Polly, thanks to you again for speaking with me again for the second time this week.
Well, thank you. It was really great.
Okay, folks, all set. So we'll see ya.